Good evening and welcome to Orenda Books at Bedtime. I'm Karen Sullivan, publisher of Orenda Books, and tonight we're travelling to Oslo for an exceptional slice of Nordic noir. Now we've got two authors writing together for the first time here. It's Jorn Leerhorst and Thomas Enger. Now Jorn is best known for his Wisting series, which is published here by Michael Joseph, and Thomas, of course, is from our own team Orenda, and he is best known for the Henning Yule series and his brilliant standalone thriller Inborn, which we published last year. So this book was out in February, just before the coronavirus hit. It's an incredible book. When it came in on submission, all I could think about was it was like reading an episode of Nordic Criminal Minds. So there's a flamboyant serial killer on the loose. And there's an amazing new team. This is the first in a series. This is the Blix and Ram series. So there's a young blogger who has an interesting and unexpected connection to a police officer. And they work together to try to find this serial killer who constantly eludes them. He leaves clues, flamboyantly leaves clues, and yet they can't track him down. And one by one, people begin to die. It's an immense book. The writing is superb, it's emotive, it's twisty, it's chilling, it's dark, and I cannot tell you how good this is. So we're publishing the next book next February, and it's called Smokescreen. It'll be the next in the Blix and Ram series, but let me tell you what it's about. Oslo, 2018. Former long-distance runner Sonja Nordstrom never shows up at the launch of her controversial autobiography, Always Number One. When celebrity blogger Emma Ram visits Nordstrom's house later that day, she finds the door unlocked and signs of a struggle inside. A bib with the number 1 has been pinned to the TV. Police officer Alexander Blix is appointed to head up the missing persons investigation, but he still bears the emotional scars of a hostage situation 19 years earlier, when he killed the father of a 5-year-old girl. Traces of Nordstrom soon show up at different locations, but the appearance of the clues appears to be carefully calculated, evidence of a bigger picture that he's just not seeing. Blix and Ram soon join forces, determined to find and stop a merciless killer with a flair for the dramatic and a thirst for attention. Trouble is, he just got his first taste for it. So this is a number 1 bestseller in Norway and around the world, and you will not forget it in a hurry. So now we're going over to Oslo and to Thomas Enger.
Hi everyone, I'm Thomas Enger. I hope you're all doing well during these strange times. I'm going to read a little sample for you from this book here, Death Deserved, which is the first collaboration that I've done with Jorn Leerhorst, my colleague from Norway. The chapter that I'm going to read is 1/3 into the book, approximately. It's from the perspective of a young woman who has been abducted. I'm sorry. Anyway, this is it, chapter 30 actually. She lay on her side and tried to relax, as far as that was possible, with her hands tightened behind her back. They were bleeding from the attempts she had made to free herself. How long had she been here now? She had no idea. She had no watch. To begin with, she had made an effort to count the hours, but she couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts were confused by the fear of what he intended to do to her. Now she was just trying to breathe as evenly as quietly as possible, in and out through her nostrils, while she waited and waited and waited. What was she waiting for, exactly? How long would she have to stay here? What was his plan? These were the same questions she had raised herself time and again. He had not raped or assaulted her. The only thing he had demanded of her was to stand up, lie down, and open her mouth, put her hands behind her back, keep quiet, not to resist, because that won't help in the slightest. She couldn't recall the last time she had wept. She had never done so in public, and to be honest, rarely in private either. Not even classic weepies had any effect on her. But in the past few days, the tears had come all the time, unbidden, needing no prompt from her thoughts. The sofa cushion she was lying on was sodden. It surprised her that, whenever she struggled to get free, she no longer felt any pain. Not in her hands, anyway. Maybe her brain wasn't registering it anymore. Perhaps the cold in this cabin had numbed her senses, put all her impulses on hold. She'd started to wonder whether there was someone she'd unwittingly hurt at some point. She was no angel, which was no secret. The newspaper never tired of saying so. But she had never gone in for tormenting people. She thought about her blanket, the one she usually threw over herself when she stretched out on the sofa at home. She would never have imagined it possible to miss something as trivial as a blanket so much. She longed to wrap it around her, inhale the scents of the fabric, drink a cup of tea and just watch something innocuous on TV, something that didn't matter. She had no memory of how she had arrived here. All she remembered was the ambush. He had worn black gloves, a hood on his head, some kind of electrical apparatus in his hand. He had held it up to her throat, and the last thing she had seen were blue sparks reflected in the paintwork of the car beside him. When she came round, she was in this cabin. He had been standing in front of her, watching her flounder and blink, struggling to understand. She had feverishly tried to loosen her bonds, but had only discovered how hard and tight the knots were. A noise made her raise her head. Was it a vehicle? Someone coming to save her from this dreadful nightmare? Hope gripped her for the first time in hours. Maybe she would be able to get out of here. Perhaps her nightmare was over. She could hear the car engine coming closer and closer. She tried to haul herself up, using the muscles in her diaphragm that she had exercised so often. She managed to scramble into a sitting position. The exertion made her dizzy for a few seconds. The taut gag over her mouth made it difficult to breathe, and her body couldn't get enough oxygen, however much she tried. The car was closed now and finally stopped outside. She heard a door open, and another footsteps on the ground, keys rattling, steps coming nearer. She couldn't hear whether there was one person or several. Her breath grew ragged again. The door opened. It felt as if a heavy lump fell from her throat to the pit of her stomach. She began to sob, to cry. She didn't see his face, but it was definitely him. She recognized the black gloves, the hood. She began to hyperventilate. She had to force herself to blink repeatedly to see clearly through her tears. A cold blast came in through the open door. Beneath her flimsy clothes, she felt goosebumps appear on her skin. He stepped inside the room and paused a moment. He was carrying a loudspeaker, which he set down on the floor. He gave her a long, cold stare, then he wheeled around and exited again without closing the door. She heard his footsteps growing more distant, and then disappearing. Then, after a moment, they began to approach again. Yet another loudspeaker was put down. Once again he stared at her before vanishing again. Not long afterwards he returned, this time with an amplifier and a remote control, a white extension lead. 2 plastic bags, one from a clothes outlet she recognized and the other from a bookshop. He placed everything on the floor before beginning to join it all together. She looked on with mounting terror as he linked all the cables. He shut the door, switched on the equipment and the various units, then fiddled with a few buttons before producing an iPod from his jacket pocket, attaching it to, and making some intricate thumb movements. Music wafted out of the speakers, a song. There was something familiar about it, but she couldn't bring to mind what it was. Once the male vocalist had sung one or two verses, the man stopped the music and nodded in satisfaction. The room was silent again. He turned on his heel and approached her with short, slow steps. "Get up," he said. Hesitating, she planted her bare feet gingerly on the ice-cold floor, discovered that she could still feel pain. He stood right beside her and stared deep into her eyes. His were blue, glacial. Then he took hold of her trousers and began to unbutton them. "No!" she screamed internally as she tried to wriggle away. "No, please not." "Take it easy," he said. "I have no intention of raping you." His cool, controlled tone made her stop, and he went on removing her trousers. She tried to ask him what he wanted, but the words disappeared into the cloth, covering her mouth. Soon her trousers were off. He had to lift her legs to complete the operation. Then he grabbed hold of her panties, began to pull them slowly down her hips to her thighs. She smothered a gasp and closed her eyes as fresh tears coursed down her cheeks. He knelt down, pulling at her underwear, his face only a few centimeters from her crotch. She held her breath, afraid that she might at any moment feel his lips or tongue, but it didn't happen. Instead, he hoisted her feet and unhooked the panties, taking them off and laying them down beside her trousers. The fine downy hairs on her thighs stood on end. With every second that passed, she expected him to put an icy finger inside her, wrench her around and force himself on her. Instead, he picked up the plastic bag from the clothes outlet and took out a bikini. "I bought this for you," he said. "I think it'll fit." He held it up. Leopard print. It resembled one she had worn the last time she went swimming on the sandy beach at Hook. He bit off the sales tag, bent down and pulled on the bikini bottom, slowly and carefully, lifting it over her hips. The stitched seams of his leather glove scratched her skin. The bottom was a bit too big for her, but the elastic at the waist held it in place. It felt good not to be completely naked. He stood up and looked at her. "Sexy," he said. She understood what he meant, not just what he wanted. He smiled again at his own comment. All at once he became serious again. "Sit down." She did as he said. A bit further over, he instructed, nodding his head closer to the corner in the TV set, which hadn't been on in all the time she'd spent there. "That's perfect," he said once she had obeyed his order. "Thanks." He was holding the bikini top in his hand. "I think I'll wait and put this on you afterwards." Afterwards? She wondered. After what? "If I free your arms, you'll only try to escape. I don't want to have to fight you." He put the bikini top on the sofa beside her, picked up the other bag and took out a book. He set it aside and approached her with the empty bag, so close to her now that she could feel his moist breath on her flesh, smell it too, fetid, sickening. He put his hands behind her head and removed the gag. She gasped breath through her open mouth. Her lips and throat were dry as dust. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. She stared at him, tried to ask what he meant, but her first attempt at speech was futile. "Regrets?" she eventually managed to stammer. "About your conduct." She had no idea what he was talking about. "I haven't done anything special." This was clearly not the answer he was hoping for. His eyes drilled into hers. She was the one who cast her gaze down in the end, struggling to think of something else to say. But all the pleas she had formulated in her head as she waited, all the strategies she had concocted, seemed to evaporate. "You're going to be ever so famous now," he said. "A real legend." She looked up at him again with wide open eyes and with no inkling of what he meant. Not until he pulled the bag he was holding over her head and shut out all the air. Death deserved. Hope you like it.
Thank you, Thomas. Once again, this is Death Deserved by Jørn Lier Horst and Thomas Enger. This is translated by Anne Bruce, and it is unforgettable Nordic noir. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week on Orenda Books at Bedtime.